Some prisms are filled with selfies, texts, or surf. Smartphones and cell phones have been inextricably tied into the modern cultural fabric. Instead of tools, they have become near necessities that have turned our lives into 24/7 interactive virtualities. Still, there are some who suggest that having a smartphone can lead to stress, anxiety, and even depression. So, the question ultimately becomes, is having a smartphone, well, smart? To answer that question, if not the phone, is Andrew Lepp. He is a faculty member in the University College of Education at Kent State University in Ohio. Welcome, Dr. Lepp.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. It's very nice to be here.
So I think we ought to start with the obvious question, which is, did your research originate because your son or daughter wanted a cell phone for Christmas?
Well, you know what? That does have something to do with it. I've got small boys. The oldest one is 10, so he's not quite ready for that. But his friends have been getting similar devices, the iPad Touch, just about everything except the phone. And I just noticed how it affected their behavior. And then being a college professor, being surrounded every day by students who, many of them seem to be glued to these devices, I've noticed change in behavior over the last 10 years in the classroom and out. And I started asking questions. And being a professor and a researcher, I have the resources to try to answer those questions scientifically.
Now, I have to admit, in my youth, I became addicted for a period to video games, and I would spend at the PC 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours playing these games. And I guess it's a similar phenomena, but what is it about these electronics, be they games, be they smartphones, cell phones, that make such a level of attachment happen?
That is something we didn't look at in our research, but I can certainly, offer some hypotheses. There's a study I saw, I don't remember the authors, just recently about, how the developers of these games actually try to make them addictive. And some of the methods would be steadily and increasing the challenge, the classic complete a level. Here's another very similar level, just slightly more challenging. That always works to lure people in. There's a sense of obligation, when you're talking about the cell phone, and I hear this from students all the time when I talk to them, sense of obligation to remain constantly connected to the network. And the cell phone is the primary tool these days for this generation of young people for facilitating interaction throughout the social network. And that sense of obligation is pretty strong, particularly with some students, the high cell phone users. I also, in conversation yesterday with a colleague, we were just batting about ideas to this very same question. And this idea was proposed. Life inside of a small screen is pretty simple. And life outside the screen can be complex. It can be complicated. Because the real world, so to speak, is more complex, it should be more interesting, but maybe people are choosing an easier version of reality. This, what do they call it? The mediated reality, right? Alternative reality. Maybe just a little easier to digest at times.
I think about that, and I think that in terms of your own research, because while it may be a simplified reality, some of that simplicity could add to stress. When I read a text, when I read a message board, the language in there doesn't account for tone. It doesn't account for sarcasm. It doesn't account for teasing or humor. And therefore, there's lots of misinterpretations which could potentially lead to anxiety, stress, or other affective states. What are you finding?
I'm finding that's playing into the relationship between cell phone use and anxiety. I'll back you up just a little bit. We have published a couple studies, and when I say we, I need to really get the names of my colleagues in here. Professor Jacob Barkey at Kent State University and Aaron Karpinski. We've worked a lot on this together. We did a study that we published over the summer that showed a relationship between cell phone use and cardiorespiratory fitness. High cell phone users sat more, and they were less fit. So the irony is, the cell phone is a mobile phone, but high users were less mobile. They were more sedentary. But during that study, we interviewed all the participants. And one question we asked was simply, how does the cell phone make you feel? Or how do you feel after using the cell phone? A large percentage of the high-frequency cell phone users said stressed, makes them feel anxious. And then, of course, we asked why. And there were several reasons, but one gets back to what you just said. Students would report that it's very difficult sometimes to communicate effectively through text messages. Intent can be lost. Certainly, we've all made jokes by text message or email that were misinterpreted. You can't see facial expressions or body language, sarcasm, tone of voice. All of that's lost, and that can be a source of stress. Another reason for the anxiety that students mentioned in the interviews was that sense of obligation that I mentioned earlier, the obligation to be constantly connected to the network. You get a text, and if you don't reply within an hour or two, people think, you're not their friend anymore. Students have actually said that. But after that initial study where we interviewed the 50 students and tested their fitness, we said, well, let's look more deeply at this potential relationship between cell phone use and stress. And that's the study we just published. For that, we surveyed 500 Kent State students, a nice representative sample, and a pretty large sample. It's actually slightly more than 500. But we measured cell phone use, we measured anxiety, and for that we used a clinical measure. It's called Beck's Anxiety Inventory. We measured happiness with another validated measure called the Satisfaction with Life Scale. And we measured academic performance. For that, we were able to access each student's official university records, so we got their actual grade point average. And what we found was students who used the cell phone more had a lower grade point average, had higher anxiety, and were less happy compared to students who used the cell phone less.
Now, did you exclude students who didn't have a phone whatsoever, or are those creatures already extinct?
Yeah, those creatures are just about extinct. When we measured cell phone use, I think out of the 536 students that we surveyed, there was only one who said zero cell phone use. So there's your no cell phone user. He doesn't own a cell phone, I'm presuming, but we left that person in the sample.
So one of the first things that pops into my mind when I'm looking at self-report data on affective states is the power of memory and history, meaning the stress you're in currently is almost always more powerful, felt more intensely than the stress you remember from 6 months ago, a year ago.
Yeah, the relationship, to talk about the measures first in a little more detail, the way that it's worded, it asks students to think about symptoms of anxiety that they've experienced over the last month. So it's certainly a dynamic measure. It can change, but it's not designed to be affected dramatically by, say, quick mood changes. For example, I'm feeling good right now because I'm having a nice cup of coffee. Then I spill it on myself, and I'm instantly upset about that. That's not what this measure is designed to pick up. It's more of an overall enduring state of anxiety. And the happiness measure is similar. It asks questions about the entire lifespan. For example, some of the questions read, the conditions in my life are excellent, and you rate that on a Likert scale, strongly agree to strongly disagree, or in most ways, my life is close to my ideal. And there's a lot of research that has looked at these measures and has found that they're pretty valid and accurate at measuring these constructs.
And I guess one additional advantage you have in working with college students in this situation would be that they're going through roughly the same things, meaning the stress of finals would all happen roughly at the same time. The stress of midterms would happen roughly at the same time. They have generally the same kinds of responsibilities, although some may work, some may not work. So you have a more homogeneous population in some respects.
That's true. And it does suggest the need to repeat the study with other populations. But something that's unique about this particular population, college students, This cohort of college students is really the first cohort, or the first among all humans, to grow up entirely immersed in the digital age. People are starting to refer to this generation as digital natives. And, they've grown up with this technology. And for that reason, I think it's worth taking a closer look at how it is affecting their behavior and behavioral outcomes. And perhaps they may be more affected than those of us who grew up without it and maybe have developed some strategies for coping with life without it.
Actually, that's very interesting. Have there been any studies? Have you looked at any studies yourself that examine the before and the after? How happy was I before I got that cell phone, and now that I've become immersed in that cell phone culture, how happy am I now, or the reverse?
Yeah, as far as I know, there isn't any studies like that. All this is really new. I mean, the smartphone just emerged, really became popular within the last 3 years. It's just recent history when we've walked around with the entire internet in our pocket. And it's, more than the internet, there's all the software and the applications on these phones. It's like having a home entertainment system with you wherever you go. That's new. And it's only in the last couple of years that people have started to take a look at this and its potential influence on behavior. Our study only identifies relationships. It wasn't designed to identify causality. And I haven't seen any other studies that have identified causality in the truest sense. But that's where we're going. Those are the next studies to come.
Now, when you did your study, did you look at which aspects of cell phone use, smartphone use, caused more stress than others? Which are the things that we should mediate, moderate, or avoid? We
did look at that, but what we found was all the different cell phone uses are pretty highly correlated, meaning that the high-frequency cell phone users, they send a lot of text messages, but they also make a couple more calls than everybody else, and they also browse the internet on their phone more than everybody else. So cell phone use in general, the different potential things you can do with it, from our perspective, the data we have, it all seems to be pretty highly correlated. I will add one thing, though, that certainly provides food for thought. We ask everyone we survey how they ordinarily use the phone. What's your primary use? Is it for education? Is it for work? Is it for leisure? And with the student populations, 80 to 90% say they use the phone mostly for leisure, which suggests it's not an obligation. It's something they're doing in their free time. And that also raises questions for education, because students are bringing these into the classroom, and they're bringing devices that they see as leisure devices into educational settings, and I believe that's becoming a distraction.
I want to ask about that distraction element in sort of an odd way, and then we can get back into a more serious way.
Sure.
I was having a conversation recently about what we used to do when we would go to a bar, especially in college, watching sports games, and we would argue about sports trivia.
Right.
And we were wondering now that phenomena might disappear, because whenever you have a question about who ran for the most yards in a bowl game ever, well, 5 people can be taking out their smartphones, go to Google or Bing, and get the answer in 30 seconds. So the answer being at your fingertip, is that reducing or increasing the stress?
That's a good question. And, I wonder if having that at your fingertips, not the answer, but the entire internet, is just reducing the debates that you guys used to have when you were in college, the frequency of the debates. Certainly they're ended more quickly, right? The debate starts, bang, there's your answer. Okay, debate ended.
Basically.
Right? But that's, another potential behavior that may be affected by these devices. And you walk around the hallways here on campus, and what strikes me and what strikes others is, take, for example, the 5-10 minutes before class when students are waiting in the hallway. You'll see groups of 3, 4, 5 students sitting together in a tight circle. Not a single one is speaking. They all have their devices out, and they're just pecking away at the screen. So face-to-face social interaction may be influenced by these devices. Again, this is just observation now at this point. This isn't anything we measured, but I'm not alone in the observations. A lot of people are recognizing this when they look at how behavior is slowly changing with the introduction of these devices.
Now, I realize you were looking at associations and not causality, but do you think that the cell phone is a secondary effect or a primary effect towards these changes in interpersonal dynamics or stress, anxiety, depression?
Well, looking at the variables that we measured, academic performance and anxiety, let's take those first. Again, we identified a relationship. We didn't look at causality, but we have the interview data from the previous study, which allows us really to make some nice hypotheses. And the students that we talked to said that this device leads to stress when I use it the whole day. Some students said they're waking up in the morning, they start texting at breakfast, they text throughout the day, and they're still texting when they get into bed at night. 100 to 200 a day for the highest users. And, when I had those students reflect on that behavior and reflect on the experience of it, in the students' own words, they said that has caused stress. That behavior causes stress. Likewise, with academic performance, we did not test causality. We just only were able to test a relationship. But you look at the way students study now, and the high-frequency cell phone users have the device in front of them. And they might be focused on their material that they need to learn for class for 5-10 minutes, but then they turn to the device for a quick break, check Twitter, check Facebook, send a text, and then go back to studying. And there is good science that suggests that sort of task switching is detrimental to learning. So, we haven't tested causality, but we can start to make some assumptions. But now we need to test them.
And do you have any recommendations other than having 500 college students flush their smartphones?
I do. And this is something that I think all parents should think about, and college students, other people who find themselves glued to the phone. There's a lot of things we can do. One simple suggestion is take an hour of each day for yourself without the phone. Treat it like a landline when you get home and dock it somewhere. Let go of it, get it out of your pocket, and have that opportunity to be with yourself, alone with your thoughts, to reflect, enjoy some solitude, or share some personal time with others in your life that are important to you in face-to-face conversation. Take a hike out in nature, leave the phone in your car. So many little things we can do that I believe would have a positive impact on the relationships that we've identified here. I think everyone needs to reflect on their cell phone use, and parents need to reflect on their children's cell phone use. Not a lot of people know this, but the American Academy of Pediatrics just a month ago released new recommendations for children in media, and for the first time they included cell phones in that. So they're saying, your young kids shouldn't have these, and they shouldn't be alone with them in the bedroom. They shouldn't have them when they're studying. It's the same things we've always said about TV. Don't study in front of the TV. Don't watch it for more than an hour or two a day. Now we're realizing that we should probably teach our kids to treat cell phones similarly.
Looking through the prism at the role of cell phones and smartphones in our lives, I'm Andrew Hiller for The Voice of Russia, and I've been joined by Dr. Andrew Lepp, who's with Kent State University's University College of Education and the Health and Human Services Department. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
Andrew, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.